5-year period from 22-23 to 22-24. The first section of the report, I've put quite a bit of detail in here about the background to the Redmond review and some of the issues that have come out of it, because I think it's quite important for members to get a full understanding of the picture in order to consider properly which option you would like to take in terms of the contract going forward. So I don't propose to go through all of section 3 in detail. It is a bit convoluted in terms of what's happened with the Redmond review and the issue of the review, the various responses by the government to the review, and that does change sort of by the day. So I've put the most up-to-date information at the time of writing the report, but it is subject to change over time, so it's not a final position. But just some key points to go through in terms of the general background. So the Redmond review was commissioned by the government because of concerns about the state of the local audit market and the effectiveness of local authority audit. So there were a number of systemic issues, if you like, that were affecting the effectiveness of external audit. So I've put a few of those in section 3.3. Obviously, as we've been aware, there are a number of authorities that were where their audits were late in being completed. When the Redmond review was initially commissioned, it was 40%. It's obviously significantly increased since then. There were lots of requests for fee variations, partly as a reflection of the fact that local authority accounts and the audit of those accounts was becoming much more complicated. There is an issue around the public audit environment, but it isn't an attractive career option for auditors in the private sector. So the fees reduced after the abolition of the Audit Commission, but when you compare that to the increase in the fees for private audits, it's not an attractive environment. So the number of key accounting partners who are the accountants who are able to sign off local authority accounts has reduced. There were some criticisms from the Financial Reporting Council about local audit processes and the quality of those audits for some local authorities. So the Redmond review had a number of findings and recommendations. I haven't put them all in the report, I've just put the key ones in section 3.4. So it just effectively reflected some of the concerns that have been raised before. It acknowledged the fact that local authority accounts have become very complicated, that it was difficult to attract the market. The original intention when the Audit Commission was abolished was to increase the number of entrants into the local authority audit market, but that didn't really materialise. So there are a number of, as I say, a number of recommendations. The government has responded to the review, so from 3.8 onwards, I've just put the whole picture in terms of the government responses, what's happened in terms of the initial actions to actually improve the audit market. So the government put some additional funding into 21-22 and has subsequently agreed that it's going to put more funding in for subsequent years to support some of the increases in the audit fees. So I don't intend to go through in detail all of those responses, but basically where we're at now, we're waiting on a response from the government to one of its further consultations. There are a number of recommendations and actions, as I say, to improve, which have included 3.14 and 3.15. So, despite all of this, the government has acknowledged that there will be some issues in advance of the next contract. So, as I say, the next contract for external audit is effective from 23-24. We obviously have a number of years to go, and they acknowledge that there are issues in the market. They put the funding in, but the systemic issues within the market, the government don't really think that they are going to be addressed, so that there will continue to be issues with getting on time for the foreseeable future. So that's the background really to the decision that the Audit Committee and then full Council need to make about the appointment of external auditors from, so that should say 23-24 onwards, as a title and the heading for section 4. So we are required to appoint an auditor every 5 years. It's a 5-year contract period. We have 3 options basically. We can appoint an auditor ourselves. We can go into partnership with other local authorities to procure an auditor, or we can opt into the National Auditor Appointment Scheme, which is administered by Public Sector Audit Appointments Limited. So section 4 of the report just sets out various options and assesses those. Currently, we buy into the PSAA framework. So looking at the various options, if we were to actually go ourselves and appoint, there are a number of processes that we have to go through. The decision would have to be made by an independent panel, and there would be a responsibility for the authority to manage the contract itself. We could join up with other authorities and then have a joint audit panel and a joint appointment process. The problem with that is that there is no appetite amongst other local authorities to actually do that joint procurement. So out of the nearly 500 eligible bodies, there are only 11 at the moment that have actually opted out of the PSAA scheme. So that really just leaves us with option 3, which is to carry on with the PSAA process. So just put it for 11, some of the key factors that would come into play if we go with the PSAA process. So they would manage the procurement process. There would be a process within that of consulting with the individual local authorities on the auditor appointments. Account would be taken of the respective complexity of the various local authorities, and there'd be a process of trying to match the most appropriate auditor to each individual local authority. So there have been some changes to that tendering process from the last time. A change to the quality and price criteria to try and put a greater emphasis on quality in the bids, and also more flexibility around the process of agreeing any fee variations during the contract. So just set out from 412 onwards what that fee setting and variation process would be. So that's just a sort of brief overview of the situation. I do appreciate it is a bit of a complex situation, but the proposal that we're putting forward is that we go with the option to continue using the PSAA framework for the appointments. So that would then need to go through to full council for formal approval. But I'm happy to take any questions on the paper.
Can the committee forgive me, please, if I understand correctly, whilst the auditors have left the room, this does remain a public meeting, and obviously any comments you may remain open to the public as well. Thank you.
Right, Ian first, and Ken.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, one comment for 2 questions. The first comment, if you go to 3.2 and you see that the responsibilities have been allocated to 6 different bodies, it doesn't surprise me that this is a bit of a sort of messy area, because that's usually, if you have all these shared responsibilities in anything, it's usually messy, so it doesn't surprise me. My first question at 3.6, it's to do with it's the penultimate bullet. Audit committees to have appropriate skills to be able to consider reports and have at least one suitably qualified independent member. Now, I know the process has started on that. If we could just have a bit of an update from someone, please, about the timescale and exactly what's going to happen on the independence, because I think that's important, and I thought that's been important for some time. My second question is, yeah, I mean, to my mind, it's a no-brainer. We have to go down the option 3 route. I think there has to be that. But it comes back to this question about how much say we have if we're going in with a bigger group. What order do we have now? Again, Simon sort of touched on this, that there may be some sort of say we have. I just wondered whether we're sort of in the hands of everyone else, or whether we have, well, it's how much it's how much say we have over who actually becomes our auditor. I think that's what it comes down to.
Just to take the first question first, yes, we've set up the working party, so I believe that committee services are trying to arrange a suitable time for the working party to meet to start that process of appointing the independent member. I don't know whether we have any other update on whether we actually have a date yet or whether it's still the diary process.
I think Adam was going to look at that as soon as possible.
Okay. Yeah, and with regard to the second point, yes, there will be that dialogue between PSAA and local authorities, and part of what PSAA set out to do in terms of sizing the lots that they will set out for the individual contracts will be to try and reflect the relative complexities of each local authority, and that will be part of the tender process for the firms that bid to show that they have that sort of qualification and experience and knowledge to be able to deal with local authorities of that complexity. So there will be a dialogue process. What we really don't know at the moment is what that field, if you like, of potential auditors will be. It is a process where external audit firms will essentially bid to be placed on the framework. So to some extent we would be bound by who actually decides to put themselves in that framework. As noted in the report, it's not a particularly attractive market for them, so we need to wait and see who we actually get in that market.
Just a supplementary to that, if I may. I mean, can we be sure, or obviously I know the answer to that, can't be sure, that the right number of sort of adequate, suitable accounting bodies will actually put themselves forward for this, given that as you rightly said, that the returns they get from this are small?
Yes, we don't know yet, and as I say, I think there are sort of two issues with that. There's the number of firms, and there is also the issue of how many key accounting partners there are around that are actually able to sign off accounts. It is a sort of critically low number at the moment, I think.
Thank you, Chair. Just for the meeting, members of the interview or selection committee have not been formally notified if they are members or not. So at the moment, other than a verbal comment at a private meeting, certainly I am not aware formally if I am a member or not of that committee. I would say, generally in relation to any commodity, it comes down to price, and if the number of people supplying are low, then price usually increases. So I just want to, just for my own clarity, just understand the process, and if the authority itself has any veto or input into who is effectively chosen, who wins the tender. So if someone wins the tender, is the authority then bound to accept that audit firm will become their auditor?
As I understand, there is a process within it. As I say, there is a dialogue between PSA and the authorities, and there is the ability for the authorities to comment when their external auditor has been allocated to them by PSAA. From my understanding, I'm not aware of any situations where a local authority has sort of refused that auditor appointment. I don't know, I can't speak to that.
Just on that point, when we went through the process last time, we were asked to confirm that we were happy for Grant Thornton to be reappointed, particularly to identify if there were any conflicts. If any other work had happened in the meantime, that would have meant they wouldn't be able to carry out the work. It's probably worth noting, it does come back to the overall capacity within the market. That at the last time this process went through, PwC withdrew themselves from the market. They previously did local authority audits. They no longer do. So we are in a much smaller pool than we were already.
Thank you. If this is a process that happens every 5 years, is this something that's quite new, or is this something that's been going on for many, many years? And if so, Grant Thornton are our current auditors. If they weren't to be re-engaged, what would happen to the number of years previous audits that are not yet signed off? Is that an awful lot of work to catch up on?
Yes, I mean this process is for the audits from 23-24 onwards. In terms of the history, this existing lot that we're in is the first lot that was done through this process. As it stands at the moment, they are external auditors for that contract period up until this new contract.
So if I may, if they weren't to be successful in the new contract and we haven't finalised all the outstanding accounts, what would happen then? Is that an awful lot of work for the new appointment?
Well, it wouldn't be. There might be some issues about sort of post-balance sheet and other technical issues that I couldn't comment on, but in terms of the audit of those accounts, they are currently contracted to do those. So they would be our auditor who would be required to do those accounts as it stands at the moment up until the 23-24 period. Because the current lot was effectively from 2018-19. So obviously with the issues we've had about the sort of the backlog of the accounts, they're only just into that contract period, if you like.
Any other questions? Steve?
So it's got a bit of a political comment. Did Tony Redmond's brief exclude the possibility of recommending repeal of the 2014 Act and reviving the Audit Commission? Because it seems like not the best result of another privatisation.
There weren't any specific restrictions on the brief. Obviously, the report comments on situation after the abolition of the Audit Commission. I think it would be speculation to say whether the situation would have been worse or better under that. Obviously, there are a number of recommendations in there that do relate to the way that the market operates, but certainly in terms of the responses from the government, when we talk about, I talked in the report about putting responsibility for the oversight of this regime into the new ARGA body. So that is the government's response to, I suppose, the findings in the Redmond review that, as I said at the beginning of the report, it's a fragmented oversight market, so that's their response to that.
Any further comments, questions? Thank you. With the recommendation that the Audit and Governance Committee considers and approves the decision to opt into the National Auditor appointment scheme for the period of 2023 to 2024 to 2027 to 2028. Can we agree with those recommendations? Yeah. Okay, fine. Thank you. Bring Thornton back in. I need to put that up. brought you back, and move on to the Audit Progress Report. So, answer yourself then.
Thank you, Chair. Unfortunately, it is just a progress report tonight. As we said in the progress report, we've had to delay reporting to the audit committee tonight. The audit is virtually complete aside from the issues around Together Energy. They largely relate to the post-balance sheet event disclosures that may be needed in the accounts in relation to Together Energy. And also potential disclosures around going concern of the group, again in terms of the impacts of Together Energy. So unfortunately we can't report because those issues could have a material impact upon our reporting and our opinion, depending upon what management decide to disclose. So unfortunately it will be a future meeting once there's a bit more information on Together Energy and what the council may be able to recover from its investments. More than happy to take any questions, Chair.
Any questions?
Andrew, are there likely to be any impairment, Andrew Linton, are there likely to be any impairment of the investments in the 17-18 accounts or the post-balance sheet review, specifically in relation to Together Energy and Redmond Bank?
I can't comment on Together Energy because of current market conditions. It would be completely wrong of me to comment on that at this stage. On Redwood Bank, we have put some calculations and some wording forward to Grant Thornton. Of course, that's subject to their final review. But we do need to look at whether there are impairments across some of our assets, as well as whether there are increases in those assets. My understanding at this moment is it's likely there will be an impairment in our investment in the level that we've invested into Redwood Bank.
Can you quantify that potential impairment at Redmond Bank, please?
Yeah, I can. Yeah, I mean the figures we've got at the moment would impair the value of Redwood Bank by around about 15 or 16 million. Which is a balance sheet entry, obviously, and doesn't actually materialise as a loss to the council unless we decided to exit from Redwood Bank at this stage.
That's a significant impairment for carrying value of 32 million. It's actually, to be honest, I'm quite shocked at the scale of that impairment. What's driven the need to reduce the carrying value of Redwood Bank?
We've had a full up-to-date valuation based on current market conditions by independent valuers, and nothing more than that.
I think one of the factors that's got to be taken into consideration as well, and during the period, the value of nearly enough all the banks worldwide has been impaired because of the current situation in the economy. There's only one bank that's increased in value over the last few years, and that's JP Morgan. So the wider banking environment's got to be taken into consideration as well, instead of just Redmond Bank on its own.
Thanks, Danny, but the investment that impacts on it is Redwood Bank, and it's really concerning that effectively there's a 50% write down in the carrying value of the bank being concentrated. Further question regarding going concern: are any of the subsidiaries potentially considered no longer going concerns? Does that have an impact on the going concern status of the council?
think that's part of the reason why Grant Thornton are unable to complete their accounts, their review, or to actually sign off our accounts tonight. As I said earlier, I can't comment on the position on Together Energy. Whether Together Energy was a going concern or not a going concern, at that point, I need to provide information to Grant Thornton to allow them to be able to do that final assessment. I don't believe there are any other issues within our accounts on anything that is not a going concern.
So again, to be clear, it's only Together Energy that could be impacted by the going concern consideration.
I don't think it would be appropriate for me to comment on the position on Together Energy at this time.
Thank you, Linton. Just want to make a comment on MRP. At the last meeting, there was a discussion, and the external auditor raised concerns regarding the use of the annuity method, in particular referencing the investments in virtual plant, and the potential that using the annuity method makes the investments no longer affordable. Has that discussion been brought to a conclusion?
So do you want me to have a go at that first?
Yeah, it's probably a joint hand.
If you want to start,
Yeah, so there is an ongoing conversation around MRP. So we have agreed the position for 1718. We have flagged some other queries, questions that we want to resolve with management. So they're not currently resolved, but obviously do impact future years. But obviously we will do that. Obviously the priority has been trying to close down the 1718 audit. I should have said this before. We do appreciate there's been a lot of hard work from the finance team. We've been meeting, I think, 2-3 times a week to discuss progress, and we've worked through quite a large number of, and sometimes complex adjustments to the accounts. So we have made a lot of progress, but that's what the focus has been, as opposed to kind of future year issues. But we will obviously resolve them once we've completed the 1718 audit.
I've just got just a couple of follow-up. Redmond Bank, just said it's been written down by 50%, but that is currently not having any MRP charged against it. I just want to record that as a concern, that no MRP has been recorded against an investment that's now lost 50% of its value. In relation to Together Energy, I understand that the MRP is being charged with charge over a 50-year period, and I just want to raise a concern that that period was far too long for what was, in my opinion, a high-risk investment. And I'd like to make those comments also for the external auditors, that I, as a member of this committee, have a concern that the MRP provisioning that has been used is not prudent. Finally, I just want to raise a specific concern regarding the MRP provisioning in relation to Times Square. If no MRP is still being charged in relation to Times Square because all units have not been let out, I have a serious concern that the MRP policies and provisioning are not prudent. Thank you. I'm just going to note that, that's fine. Finally, I would like to understand, in relation to the property investments, now that MRP is being charged against them, including virtual park, are all investments still producing a return for the council, or are some of those investments no longer producing a return for the council on an annuity basis? And what would be the implication for the return if a straight line, I must say, in my opinion, straight line is far more prudent on a straight line basis. Thank you.
I think that comes back. I think that partly comes back to what Andrew said earlier. We're still working through some of that, given that none of it impacted on 2017-18 as part of those accounts. And what we're doing is looking back to see what further impact it would have had on previous years as part of what other adjustments we might need to make to our accounts, but also then building in what impacts that has as part of ongoing into the budget process. So we're working through all of that detail at this moment.
Thanks, Lindsay. Can I ask for is the simple paper that to be issued to the Audit and Corporate Governance Committees that shows the impact of the MRP charge and the underlying return now from those property investments, but on two bases, one the annuity basis and one straight line basis?
I think we need to do that anyway, Councillor, to make sure that we're happy as we move forward into setting the budget and as part of the overall Treasury management strategies. So I've no problem with us including that extra information for this committee.
Yeah, hopefully a report's coming to the next meeting, and one of the recommendations that I think will be appearing in the final report is that we justify the annuity method. So what we hope to bring to the next meeting when we bring you the Treasury management strategy will be a report hopefully justifying or not justifying the annuity method. We're currently working on that, as Winston says, as we speak, so you should have that report at the next meeting.
We finished now, Ken?
Thank you.
Okay, Mark.
Thank you, Chair. Just going back to Grant Thornton's report, you cited February as a target date for the 17-18 accounts. Is that achievable now in the light of the comments you made?
I might let a couple in to come in to provide a bit more clarity on this, but based on the conversation yesterday, it possibly isn't. It may well be the March meeting, but I'll let Winston say it on.
Any further questions?
So it really does depend on information that becomes available in the next few weeks relating to Together Energy. If the earlier we have that information available that I can then share it with the auditors, the more chance that we have of meeting that February deadline.
Thank you. And Chair, if I may, in terms of then the 18-19 audit, I think at the last meeting it was noted that Grant Thornton would come back with a programme for the 18-19 audit at this meeting. Obviously, we understand there have been developments since that time, so I just wondered when this committee would expect to see a programme for the 18-19 audit.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you. So yes, we have intended to bring that timetable to this committee, but because of the delays, we decided to defer that until the February meeting. So we will intend to do that, and we'll sit down with management to discuss that timetable. Obviously, it will have caveats in terms of where we get to in 17-18, because the intention is, whilst we will hopefully maybe kind of start some of the work in lieu of the delay, we obviously cannot sign off and finalise that audit until we've dealt with 17-18.
So, one final question, Chair, relates to an investment approved by Cabinet earlier this week, which was Easier Housing Limited, and I know from past discussions with Grant Thornton, they have provided comments into the Council on certain investments in the past, and I just wanted to know, have you passed any comments into Council on this occasion for that investment that was approved on Monday at Cabinet?
No, we haven't passed comment upon that particular investment. The first I was aware of it was when I got the Cabinet papers the other week.
Thank you. I'd just like to ask, what would be the impact to the council or council finances should one of or more of the council's investments fail? In terms of payment, I kind of believe that I was once told that we borrow money significantly at a reduced rate, and it's obviously loaned out and then paid back through investments. If these fail, then other areas of the council will need to pay for these investments, pay back to the people where we've got the money from in the first place. And if that's the process, if I'm right, I'm guessing that some investment, the profit made will be used to pay off the profit lost, therefore we may be left at zero, or worse, less, in which case, where does that leave the council, and how do we afford to do that? Thank you.
I'm happy to answer that. I don't think this is really a question for Grant Thornton. It depends which investment, it depends what the way that particular investment is funded. You'll be aware from previous discussions that the council has set up a strategic risk reserve where we put some of the money that we make on our investments to one side to mitigate the potential risk if something did fail. We're in a very fortunate position that until now, none of our investments have failed. That doesn't mean that any of them might not fail in the future. So it's very important we have that money put to one side so it doesn't have an immediate impact on the council's budget. That's not to say that something disastrous couldn't happen, and it might have a significant impact on the council's budget. But at least that reserve would be there to mitigate it and to help us to get some time to actually know how we address it. One of the things we do in terms of the overall risk assessments, and this will be covered within the paper that Dan referred to that comes to the next committee, is actually an assessment against each of our investments and to understand the risk profile and the likelihood of some of them going wrong and what would happen if each of them went wrong, so that we can quantify that and then link that back to the overall level of reserve that we've got for that risk mitigation. But I think again, it's one of those that I think it needs to go into a lot of detail, and we've got that detail on the individual investments.
Thank you. So I could just ask a supplementary for that. Originally, the accounts were held up from 2017-18 based on the legality of Redwood Bank investment. Have we finalised that now? Have we moved on? And if that's the case, then that's fine. But I was thinking if Redwood Bank was a contentious issue and it was found that it was no longer able to, it was a legal act, then where do we go with the money aspects of that in that instance?
That objection was determined, can't remember the exact date, but I think it was 2020. August 2020. And that did conclude that it wasn't clearly unlawful. On that basis, we haven't raised any sort of that issue any further.
Okay with that?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Jay. I just wanted to actually follow up on the question from my colleague. The strategic risk reserve I understood to be around £30 million, and I understood something like 15 million of that would be used to cover the MRP, the adjustment to MRP. I believe, again, I may be wrong in the numbers, but I don't think I'm materially wrong. There's about 15 million remaining. You know, if we were to suffer a loss, and there's a 16 million, I think, loss now to Redwood Bank, is that charged to the strategic risk reserve? If we were to suffer a failure of, let's say, Together Energy, would that be charged to the strategic risk reserve? And if they were, there's a requirement then to rebuild the reserve, which means a charge to general reserve. So I don't think it's quite as easy to dismiss the issue, to say we are reserved. I think potentially there is not sufficient reserve to cover the issues that we're facing, and there's an impact potentially for the general reserve.
On the Redwood issue, no, that wouldn't be charged there. It's not a charge to a revenue reserve to address that. That's just a current carry figure on the balance sheet. Yes, if there was a catastrophic issue, it could come back to that level, but we would need to understand exactly how which it was, how it had been funded, the impact on capital, the impact on repayment of loans. So it's not just as straightforward as a loss would immediately appear against that particular risk register.
The bulk of the investments as well are also classed as capital expenditure, so if any one of them did fail, there wouldn't be a hit to the council's reserves, there would be a hit to the balance sheet, but the reserves wouldn't be affected.
Well, presumably that would affect the usable reserve, which stood at the last statutory accounts at 135 million, and would reduce the reserve base of the council. And as the council was borrowed in excess of 1.6 billion. So just make that point then and say, with £1 billion of investments, what level of strategic risk reserve do you believe is prudent?
I think from the assessments we've done so far, we believe that the level we have is prudent. I'm not quite sure where this, I appreciate the role of this committee, but I'm not quite sure where this questioning is going, given that the item we're discussing is Grant Thornton's audit update.
Thanks, Liz. I was following on from my fellow members' questioning, and it seemed to be an opportune time to examine the issue of the reserves that we have. And raise, it is an issue to be considered. What is the correct level of strategic risk reserve against an investment portfolio of 1 billion? I'll leave it with that.
Any further questions? Any further questions for Thornton?
Chair, can I clarify a point for the minutes? Councillor Fellows asked about the Redmond Bank objections. I think maybe memory fades, I suppose, as time moves on. But I think the comment was that it wasn't clearly unlawful. Can I just clarify for the minutes? It wasn't unlawful. There was no finding of illegality at all. I'm happy for that to be say as monetary officer that can go into the minutes, otherwise there would have been reports to full council on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. For that. Thank you.